All right, so we have fertilization taking place. As soon as that occurs, we're going to go through what's called a period of cleavage. Cleavage is obviously one of those words that can have many different meanings, but in this case, what we're talking about is dividing or splitting. A good way to think of it is like a meat cleaver. If you've ever seen one of those, it's like a big axe that you use to chop meat. So that's the same idea. We're splitting or we're dividing. We are cleaving. All right, so zygote says is the product of pronuclei uniting. Remember, pronuclei, that's the nucleus that comes from the sperm and the egg are considered pronuclei. So when they join at fertilization, that fertilized egg, we are going to call it a zygote once it becomes fertilized. All right, so as soon as that happens, it's going to start to divide. That one cell is going to go through mitosis. This would be a good note if you got this printed off. Write mitosis really big somewhere on this slide because that's what's occurring right here. So when it splits, the product of that is called a blastomere. So if you look at, picture B right here. A is the fertilized egg. It's kind of hard to see. It just looks like a cell, but A is a fertilized egg. So as soon as it splits, that one cell, A, has split and become two cells, which is on B. So we could call that the blastomere because it's the product of the cleavage or of the cells dividing. And then as we progress a little bit further, those collections of cells are known as a morula. A morula is a solid ball of cells produced within 3 days of fertilization. So this takes a little while to get started. At fertilization, when the sperm and egg combined, if we can fast forward 3 days later, all we are is 16 cells large, and that's the morula. So that's what we can see in C over on the right side. It's 16 cells, and it's a solid ball, which means that they're not hollow on the inside. That's important because in the next stage, blastocyst on the bottom says this is a hollow ball that embeds into the endometrium. So we start off, fertilized egg is the zygote. It splits and becomes blastomeres. Those blastomeres continue to divide into a solid ball of cells called the morula, but then something weird happens. That ball of cells is going to hollow out on the inside. It's going to become hollow, and that hollow section in the middle is what eventually is going to develop into our body cavity. So like the thoracic and the abdominal pelvic cavities, those come from that hollow section in the middle. So that's why that's important. And the blastocyst is the hollow ball. It says it embeds into the endometrium. Remember, the endometrium being the inner lining of the uterus. So that's where it actually implants. That's where it embeds into the uterus. And then we've got some pictures right here. So kind of notice the timeline. Day 0, this is where fertilization occurs. So the egg, or the secondary oocyte, leaves the ovary down here where it says ovulation. It moves anywhere from 12 to 24 hours is when it is, when it is viable. And then the sperm cell have made their way, and they combine right here as fertilization. If you see, tiny little bitty sperm cells are in that picture in this area right here. All right, so at fertilization, day 0 is where the pronucleus formation begins, where the sperm and egg DNA combines. All right, we're going to start dividing. So at day 1, we have a 2-celled stage. Day 2, we've got 4 cells. By the time we get to day 3, this is where we have our early morula and the late morula, day 3 and 4. Remember, morula, this is the solid ball of cells. So day 3 or 4, we're at the morula, about 16 cells or so. And then as we continue to go further, it says day 6 to 7, after fertilization, is where blastocyst implantation occurs. All right. So if you wanted to just add a couple notes where it says morula, you could write solid ball. Where it says blastocyst down here, you can write hollow ball. And I would kind of make a note of that timeline. So day 6 to 7 is when implantation occurs. That means that fertilization has occurred, sperm and egg have combined, but after that, it's going to be almost another week before that collection of cells, that blastocyst, makes its way to the endometrium, the inner lining, and it implants into the uterus. All right, so it's kind of a long process at the beginning. Implantation is when the blastocyst nestles into the uterine lining. If you can look at this picture up top, blastocyst is the hollow ball. The inner cell mass, this is where some of our organs and tissues are going to come from, digestive system and things like that. And then it's got the uterine wall right here. So this bottom part of this picture, what we're looking at, that's the inside of the uterus. So this would be the endometrium. And when they make contact is when implantation starts to occur. It begins about the 6th day of development. And we can see the outer layer of the blastocyst is called the trophoblast. So that's pretty important. I would know that. Trophoblast is the outer layer of the blastocyst. So as soon as it comes in contact, you can see right here it says the invading trophoblast. So it forms these almost finger-like projections that are going to go into the endometrium. They're going to embed into the inner lining of the uterus, and that's where implantation occurs. That's where they kind of fuse and grow together. So the trophoblast will help form the placenta. Some of these cells that are invading, that are going in, are going to become the placenta, and we'll talk a lot more about that in a little bit. But here's another really big important thing that it does. The trophoblast secretes a hormone called HCG, and I would know what that means. There's a lot of hormones in these two chapters, reproduction and growth and development, so keep a track on those. HCG is human chorionic gonadotropin. All right, human chorionic gonadotropin helps maintain the pregnancy. If you remember from the last chapter, the corpus luteum was the outer layer after ovulation occurs. The part of the follicle that remains, that is not the secondary oocyte, was called our corpus luteum. And it was producing estrogen and progesterone. We said the reason it does that is estrogen and progesterone maintain the uterine lining. It keeps it vascularized. It keeps it with a lot of blood flow and nutrients in case implantation occurs, in case the egg got fertilized and it implants in the uterus. All right. So what HCG does is, if implantation occurs, that means the trophoblast is embedding into the uterus, then the trophoblast is going to release HCG. That travels throughout the bloodstream, but when it goes to the corpus luteum, it tells the corpus luteum, hey, keep secreting estrogen and progesterone because we have implantation. We've got a fertilized egg. We do not want a menstrual cycle to occur because that would wash out the fertilized egg when the inner lining of the uterus leaves. So HCG maintains the corpus luteum, and it tells the corpus luteum to keep secreting estrogen and progesterone. Now, a little bit later, the placenta is going to start releasing progesterone for us. So we're not going to need the corpus luteum, but the placenta isn't developed yet. So HCG allows the estrogen and progesterone to continue by being produced from the corpus luteum. That's a lot of words right there, but hopefully you can get that. And like we said earlier, estrogen and progesterone maintains the thickness and the vascularization of the endometrium. Also, remember that estrogen and progesterone are going to inhibit FSH and LH. FSH and LH are important if we're going to go through a menstrual cycle, but we don't want that to happen because we've just had fertilization and implantation. So we do not want to go through a cycle. We want to stop and let this developing. At this point, it's beginning to become an embryo. We want this embryo to start developing. Okay? And also, if that kind of sounds familiar, if you've heard of that before, HCG, that's what's tested for during a urine pregnancy test. So about a week after fertilization, once we start producing HCG, that's what you do when you pee on the pregnancy stick. Some of that elevated levels of HCG are found in your urine, and that test can detect those. All right, so summary of the stages and events of early human prenatal development. So this is very early on. We're not at the embryonic stage or the fetal stage or anything yet. Or actually, embryonic stage is happening pretty soon. All right, so fertilized ovum. Ovum just means egg cell. So the fertilized egg would be the zygote. And if you wanted to write that, if you've got this printed where it says fertilized ovum, you can write zygote out to the side because that's just the fertilized egg. So this stage occurs 12 to 24 hours after ovulation. That's when the zygote forms, and that's when fertilization typically occurs, somewhere in that window. Cleavage is when the cells start to split. So 30 hours to the third day is when the cells are going to start to split and divide. Mitosis increases the number of cells. 30 hours to the third day is while this is taking place. The cells are starting to divide. So we go from 2 to 4 to 8. The morula, that stage is from the 3rd to the 4th day, and this is where the cells are increasing, but it's still a solid ball of cells. It has not hollowed out yet. So we said around 16 cells or so. The blastocyst is the 5th day through the 2nd week. So day 5 through day 14 is the blastocyst, and this is where the cells are hollow. So you could write that just like a one-word note out to the side. Hollow is where the blastocyst occurs. This is typically going to be like 25 to 100 cells large. So we're starting to pick up steam. We're starting to divide. The trophoblast was the outer layer. That's what invaded and starts to become the placenta. And then that inner cell mass forms. That inner cell mass is going to be what becomes the actual embryo. All right, and lastly is the gastrula. So this is the end of the 2nd week. At this point, we have primary germ layers that are starting to form. We will talk a lot more about this later, but let me go ahead and show you. I've got some notes that I had typed up already. So what I'm going to do is just pull these up real quick, and if I were you, I would just hit pause and type these out real quick. So when I say primary germ layers, this is what we mean. There are 3 different layers that form early on during embryonic development. And the names are actually pretty helpful. Endo means inside, meso means middle, ecto means outside. So of those 3 germ layers, the inner layer is called our endoderm, and that's what is eventually going to become your digestive tract and your lungs. Make a note of these. There's not that much, but I would know which layer becomes what structures. So the endoderm becomes your digestive tract and your lungs. The mesoderm becomes your muscles, heart, kidneys, and reproductive structures. So that kind of makes sense. It's most of your inner sections. And then the ectoderm becomes the central nervous system and your skin. Some of these you're just going to have to memorize, but where I was saying this sort of makes sense. Endo is inside, so like the inner tube that runs through your body is your digestive tract. All right? And then you just have to add lungs to that. Meso is the middle, so not the very inner layer, which is your digestive tract, but everything in the middle, between your digestive tract and your skin. It's going to be things like your muscles, heart, kidneys, reproductive structures. Ecto means outside. So ecto means outside, so the skin is the outside layer, and then you would just have to add central nervous system to that. Okay? We will get a lot more into that really shortly in just a little bit. But those are the different stages. All right, so this also shows why certain nutrients are needed really early during pregnancy. It's important. They will suggest that if you are thinking about being pregnant, or if you're thinking about getting pregnant or trying to be pregnant, to go ahead and start taking prenatal vitamins. Because really early on, just in the first couple weeks, you're starting to develop these organ systems. A lot of times you might not even know that you're pregnant in the first couple weeks. So it's a good idea to be getting those nutrients like through a prenatal vitamin just in case you'll have them ready. And then this is just a summary of what we have said right there. Okay, so really quickly, some hormonal changes during pregnancy, and this is as far as what preserves the uterine lining, that makes sure that our uterus stays intact. We've said earlier that the trophoblast secretes HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin. This maintains the corpus luteum, which is what's left of the follicle after ovulation. Corpus luteum continues to secrete estrogen and progesterone promote growth, development, and maintenance of the uterine wall. Really said all that in the previous slide, but this might be a little bit easier to follow than just me talking. So I would kind of use this to study. And this chart is just kind of showing that. So right before the end of the first month of pregnancy, you see a really big spike in HCG. Okay, that's because the trophoblast is secreting that HCG. When that level elevates, so it's really, really high at this point. This is where you could get a positive test on a urine test on a pregnancy. And then we see that the levels respond to that of estrogen and progesterone. So high levels of HCG are making the corpus luteum produce a ton of estrogen and progesterone. That keeps our uterus intact. As the HCG levels drop off, estrogen and progesterone continue to increase. The reason for that is that at this point our placenta has started to develop, and the placenta is really pumping out a lot of progesterone, and your body can convert some of that into estrogen. So we'll continue to look at the hormones on part 3.